Yeah, this video is about why Moon Knight is not good, actually. Look, okay, I'm not here to nitpick. I'm not here to tell you that this show isn't Daredevil, because nothing will ever be Daredevil. The show is its own thing, and I will be critiquing it as such. That being said, I actually really liked Disney Plus's Moon Knight. I thought the show was a really cool, mind-bending experience, and the story of Mark Spector and his struggle with DID and coming to terms with all the regrettable actions he's taken in his life as a merc, and ghosting the shit out of his wife was just really good. I love the action, I love the music, and not to mention the cinematography. Oh my god, dude. The show looks really good. It's really well shot. The MCU's been on a real roll lately when it comes to visuals, especially after all that schlock with the car commercial style cinematography that video essayist types like me really want to bitch about. So, what gives? Why am I, a liker of Thing, making a video about why Thing bad, actually? Well, while I do like the show a lot, I should be able to admit that it does have its flaws. It is my personal belief that you don't really like something until you can bitch about it. And boy howdy, do I have some stuff to bitch about. So what is it? What is Moon Knight's fundamental flaw? What's the one thing about the show that I felt so strongly enough about to make a whole ass video essay about it that's 20 minutes long? Well, this show lifts a lot of cool ideas from the comics, along with some of its own original ideas. But they didn't really mesh together super well. They ended up taking really cool concepts and storylines from the comics and adapting them, let's say, poorly, for lack of a better term. In short, the execution of these ideas is what killed the show for me and other fans of the character. Disclaimer, I've not read a lot of Moon Knight, just the stuff I did researching this video, which I'll get onto later. As I said in the beginning, I really like this series, but I'm not the biggest Moon Knight fan. My knowledge of him was limited to Spider-Man Web of Shadows and some random videos I might have watched about him as a kid. That being said, based off my research and what friends who have read Moon Knight and do know things about him have said, I've come to the conclusion that the series failed to capture the core of what really made this character special in the eyes of his fans. There are some general things about the show, like a general lack of any street level taking out thugs and bad guys to satiate Khonshu, or them making his suit this mystical, super overpowered Egyptian suit of armor, stuff like that. But today I want to particularly focus on the characters. Characters like...
You're not gonna die. Let me save us.
Mark Spector was an ex-mercenary who died in Egypt under a statue of the Egyptian god of the moon, Khonshu. At the foot of the statue, he sprung back to life under servitude of the god, fighting crime for his redemption, sworn to protect the travelers of the night as Khonshu's fist of justice, as his
Moon Knight.
The show adapts this part of the story pretty closely, and I want to take a second here to talk about my broadest points in this video essay, weird thing for me to say out loud. Points like his origin here. And as we move on in this video, we're gonna get more and more obscure, alright? Okay.
She's gonna find out I'm a Jew, Fives!
I know as much about Judaism as I did Moon Knight when I started watching the show. So it's not really gonna be a main facet of this video. But you probably knew that I wasn't gonna be talking about Judaism for an hour and a half. Mark Spector's Judaism is strangely absent from the show, and I don't know if this is the director's decision or not. Maybe they wanted to delve into it, but then Disney saw there was too much Judaism in their superhero show and started giving my homeboy Muhammad the stinky eye. They omitted Mark Spector's religion from the show, which in turn removed this idea of his beliefs being challenged by the existence of literal Egyptian gods. That's just one of the many things they ditch in the show in favor of more Egyptian mythology adventures. Why would they do this? Simple. Homeboy wants to make Black Panther for Egyptian people. Mohammed Diab said in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, "My daughter, when she was 5, wanted to straighten her curly hair because she never felt like she saw herself in any of the Disney movies and cartoons." So, to see this woman who looks like an everyday Egyptian with beautiful curly hair become a superhero is something huge. Egyptian people treat Moon Knight as if it's our Black Panther. You don't know how big it is, Diab tells the Hollywood Reporter. They wanted Egyptian rep, and I respect that a lot. Representation is important, but maybe Moon Knight is not the place to be looking for it. Mark Spector's Moon Knight costume in the comics is spandex. It's fabric. If Moon Knight takes a beating, he takes a beating. Which is, a common risk when it comes to enacting the wrath of an Egyptian god on the criminal element. Injuries and physical trauma are an essential part of any modern superhero story. The show has magic armor that heals his injuries. This just takes out a lot of the potential dramatic tension in a fight, because at the end of it, Mark's gonna be just fine, because he has that magic suit. At least until he doesn't. Like toward the end of the show, when Khonshu gets sealed in stone. And this part of the story is one of the most exciting ones in the show, because of the tension. These moments are tense, alright? If Mark gets shot, he's gonna get shot. And he does! He fucking dies in episode 4. Which brings me to my next point. Before I get to this part of the video, I do want to say, DID is something that is a very poor representation in media. There's a lot about this topic that just won't fit into this video, like how there's always that trope of the evil split personality. And that's really outdated and insensitive and plain just not what I'm going to be talking about this video. Yet. That being said, Mark Spector's mental illness is a focal point of some of the best Moon Knight stories out there, and it's a focal point in this show too. His DID and his struggle to find a balance between his alters, or in the show's case, alter, allusion to the finale, are a very important component of the story. The DID itself, in my opinion, is handled very well, but there's a layer of trippiness that's somewhat lacking in the show. You see, Mark Spector's mental illness isn't just limited to DID. He also seems to have some form of schizophrenia. He often sees and hears things that may or may not really be there, which creates this sort of unreliable narrator type scenario where you're not really sure if what you're being shown or what you're seeing or hearing is actually real at all. Any Moon Knight fan will tell you over and over again about this moment in the Lemire run where the whole story ends in the exact same place that it began. Not like a hero's journey, full circle kind of way, more like a this all just took place in Mark's head kind of way. This was a main aspect of the run that fans loved, and understandably so, because that shit was so cool and trippy and like mind-bending. So how did the show adapt this aspect of the character? Barely. The closest the show ever gets to the surreal, psychoanalytic adventures of comic Moon Knight is in episode 4's hospital scene. This was the first notable moment in the show where you would really start to question whether or not what we've been watching up to this point had been an illusion or not. And it was fucking amazing! And the next episode debunks this immediately. Mark Spector in episode 4 of Moon Knight is shot by the antagonist, Arthur Harrow. He begins to fall backwards, but the moment before he hits the ground, he awakes in a psychiatric hospital. And for a while, it really seems like Mark just woke up from a very long delusion. But instead of going into a dramatic psychoanalytic character study of Mark Spector like they did in the Lemire run, they instead have Mark meet up physically with his alter, Stephen Grant, and the two of them end up bumping into Tawera. The Egyptian goddess of women and children, who guides them through their journey to the afterlife. And then we get the psychoanalytic character study, and just... I do appreciate them even adapting the whole psych ward bit from the Lemire run, but they did it in kind of a half-hearted way. They had Mark waking up in the hospital, and they presented the whole premise of the adventure not being real, but it immediately gets debunked the moment Tawera opens her big hippo mouth.
Hippopotamus. Hippopotamus.
It really detracts from the idea of, holy shit, maybe none of this was real, when you have a character here to hand you the answer and tell you, yeah, it's real. You're on a boat. a sea of sand on your journey to the afterlife, whatever, it's cool. It's just not the same. It's not the same. I'm mad that the thing isn't like the comics. Fuck you. Comics are a blueprint. I want every show ever to use the comic books as a storyboard. Fuck you. The show ditched the idea of Mark Spector being trapped in a psych ward in favor of more Egyptian mythology slop. Again, keep in mind, I like this show. I like to wear it. I think she's cute. I thought this concept of Steven having to physically return to traumatic points of Mark's life, slowly realizing that he's just a coping mechanism for his trauma, all the while Mark tries to stop his comfort character from realizing how fucked up he is, was incredible. It was an incredible part of the show, and the moments in the journey to the afterlife are some of the most emotionally compelling ones it has to offer. But removing this moment of uncertainty, getting rid of that moment where you begin to wonder, is this real? Will Mark and Steven really die? Robs the story of a lot of potential depth that it had in the comics. The decision to focus on the Egyptian mythology aspect of the character was an interesting one for sure, but it's just not the one that fans gravitated toward. In fact, it wasn't even a main aspect of the character to begin with. They changed so many things about the character, and for what? Were they just trying to make him less like Batman? They omitted so many aspects of him, which in turn got rid of so many interesting things you could have done with the character. In trying to make him less like Batman, they ended up not making him Moon Knight. The biggest offender of this is what they did to the fifth personality, Mr. Knight. Which brings us to...
Like a butterfly, stinging like a bee. My name's Steven with a V.
He's a little guy! He's a little baby! He's just a little guy. He's a little guy! He's a little guy! He's a little guy! He's a little scrunkly bunkly! He's a little guy! The show and the MCU in general, to an extent, like to do this thing where they flanderize specific aspects of a character so quickly that all subtlety and nuance that they could have had is immediately flushed out. Steven Grant is this week's victim of the MCU's brand of flanderization. Watch as he goes from a grounded everyman struggling with events and forces that he can't understand to a wacky, silly little guy who dances around and does silly things. Steven Grant suffers from what I like to call the him-baby effect. The him-baby effect, as it were, is what happens when a character whose aspects and traits that could make them get perceived as cute by viewers get flanderized to a point where that's a main facet of the character, at least in the fandom. This is essentially the same concept as a Tumblr sexy man, but instead of being sexy, they're cute or baby. This is a phenomenon that has unfortunately claimed MCU Spider-Man, and it's a topic that I'd like to get more in depth on in a future video. But until then, Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight in the Moon Knight comics is the culmination of Mark Spector's arc of becoming a real hero and a better person. He was a more competent hero who worked with the cops and acted more as a subtle detective rather than a violent vigilante. In the show, he's just a little scrunkly bunkly. He's a little guy. The decision to make Mr. Knight what is essentially Steven Grant's superhero persona is a dim-witted and unintelligent idea that ultimately undermines the years and years of story arcs that this character had to go through to reach this point. Here we go, everybody! I'm bitching. While the idea of the individual alters having their own version of the Moon Knight garb is a really interesting one in concept, it makes sense with the whole magic suit thing, and it's a really good way to sell more merch! Because fuck yeah, merch! Marketing me, baby. Make me want to buy shit. Suck my money out of my wallet like you're a vacuum cleaner sucking up the sand off my floor tiles. Doing something like that without going through the required story arcs to get to it first is kind of like if Tony Stark had his nanotech armor in the first Iron Man movie. It's completely alienating to people who knew the character beforehand, and it's just plain disrespectful to the new viewers for robbing them of that juicy story that you could milk for an extra 10 years. Come on, Disney. Don't tell me you don't want that extra 2 seasons. I know you want it, just take a bite. Steven Grant's role in the show is actually fairly on point. Slight flanderization aside, Steven Levine's role as a straight man to the hectic Egyptian themed adventure that he doesn't even realize he's taking part in is a pretty cool premise for the show. You know, isn't pretty cool though? They made him evil! He's not fucking evil! Jake Lockley is like a regular dude for the most part. He's a gruff and tough New York cab driver who uses that to watch over the people of the city. He's a little guy! He's a little squirrel! Hey, come on!
Come on!
Well, he has been presented as the alter who resorts to violence more, but he isn't outright evil. The show hints at existence to titillate the fans who already knew about him. Ooh, is that Jake Lockley? Ooh, I wonder if Jake's the guy in the coffin. Ooh, I wonder when Jake's gonna show up. Ooh, is Jake gonna show up? And he does show up, and it's just...
Meet my friend, Jake Lockley.
He isn't a submissive, subservient slave to Khonshu. He's like the second main alter who does Moon Knight shit. Or, well, I guess that's why maybe Khonshu uses him as his little guy in the show, but like... There isn't enough about Jake to talk about in the show. Obviously, we have like one scene and little sprinkles of him in the show. So like, we're just gonna move on to the next bit.
Alright, I've run out of patience. On to ruse!
Because of the nature of the story that they created, the show omits nearly all of the side characters from the Moon Knight comics. We all probably knew that Disney wasn't just gonna adapt an openly gay character like John Paul Duchamp. Sorry, Frenchie. A moment of silence for our fallen comrades. The show only really has one side character who sticks around after the first 2 episodes, and she also happens to be Mark Spector's love interest, Marlene Alrutt. What? What? El who? Why? Okay, Lila El Fuli, who is Mark Spector's wife who he ghosted to keep her away from all this superhero drama. I mean, you always gotta have that. Superheroes always gotta have something angst about. Okay, so Lila is a bit of an odd case. You might often see her getting referred to as the most interesting original character in the MCU. That statement is a farce, a fallacy, a facade, alright? Lila El Fuli is not who she claims to be. She is in fact Marlene Alrutt, Mark Spector and Stephen Grant's love interest. I can't speak for her accuracy to the comics because, again, not that well versed in all things Moon Knight, but I'm pretty sure that she didn't become a Scarab-themed superhero in any of the Moon Knight comics. The Scarlet Scarab was actually lifted from the pages of The Invaders. He was a guy named Abdul Fowl. He showed up a couple times, and if you notice, his surname, Fowl, is actually pretty similar to Lila's. Fowl. And in fact, I checked this out. Her original name in the show was Zina Fowl. Fowl. And this made me wonder. This made me think. Did they just take some random character from the Invaders comics, Rule 63, and then place them in this Moon Knight show, and then they were the love interest? I don't know, maybe. Marlene Alrutt had the potential to be a really interesting character and a wonderful foil to Mark Spector in this adaptation. She had connections to his origins and the unique trait of dating a guy who kept his arch nemesis' face in a box and liked to wear it sometimes. Yo, sidebar, Moon Knight was really crazy for a while. The juicy drama practically writes itself. But apparently, according to director Mohammed Dia, she wasn't even considered for the show. Why was this? Maybe they felt Marlene wasn't a strong enough character for the MCU! Only strong, independent women are allowed. If she can't suit up and fight goons at the end of the show, I don't fucking want her! Oh, my glasses fell. I'm not saying that I dislike the character of Lila El Fuli, or that having powerful female lead the superhero media is a bad thing. I'm saying that the creation of a whole new character just to replace one that could have been reworked is unnecessary. And I'm not saying that I don't like her being a superhero either. What I am saying is that they could have done all of this superhero dunking on Wonder Woman 1984 and still have just called her Marlene. I mean, honestly, it's that easy. Like, Marlene becoming a temporary avatar of Taweret to save Mark in a moment of need is probably not gonna piss off Moon Knight fans as much as the shit you pulled with Mr. Knight.
perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Arthur Harrow showed up once in the comics, in one issue. That's less than El Muerto. In issue 2 of Moon Knight, Fist of Khonshu, Dr. Arthur Harrow was presented as some random mad scientist evil schmuck. He experimented on people in kind of a Frankenstein-esque way to make them his super strong henchmen to fight Moon Knight. And he has a condition called, let me read this here. He has a condition called trigeminal neuralgia tictorello, which in the comics basically means half his face is fucked up. He's a fucked up little guy who thinks they, and I quote, didn't go far enough in Auschwitz. What a quirky little guy. Sidebar, Mark being Jewish and fighting a neo-Nazi would have been crazy, but hey, Mark isn't Jewish and he's a Nazi. It's equivalent exchange. The scales need to be balanced, like the ones on his wrist tattoo. Wow. I don't hate Harrow as a villain in the show, but I don't really love him either. He's at his most interesting literally in the opening scene of the show. Harrow never really did anything that made him stick out to me as a villain in the show. Other than being a dark mirror to Mark and his servitude to Khonshu, he doesn't really like do anything interesting. He's boring. He's fucking boring. And I can't really get much into how his place in the story and the way they adapted it into the show didn't really work for me without actually talking about the story itself for a bit. So let's do that. Come on, just a nibble. There are two things I read in doing research for this video. Issue 2 of Moon Knight Fist of Khonshu and issues 1 to 14 of the 2016 Jeff Lemire run of Moon Knight. In 2016's Moon Knight, the book you'd be insane to miss, written by Jeff Lemire with art by Greg Smallwood, the book goes on a mind-bending journey through Mark Spector's scarred psyche. The show takes much inspiration from the run, but it does so in a very strange way. There are a lot of beats in the story that are recreated in the show. Mark being trapped in a mental hospital, Egyptian gods enacting a hostile takeover of Earth, Mark Spector finding balance with his alters, this hug with Stephen Grant, Amit, Mr. Knight, flashbacks to Mark's backstory, a lot of it's there. But the things the show chose to adapt and the way they chose to adapt them are about as detached from the source material as Mark Spector is to his own reality. The true story of the 2016 Moon Knight run is one of balance. Mark Spector finding peace with himself and his reality. He dives headlong into his own broken mind and comes out the other side a better, slightly more stable man. The show aimed to do a lot of the things that they accomplished in the comic, but they didn't quite commit enough to its surreal process to really do the same things with the same level of weight and gravitas. The show lacks a level of tension that the comic has. The Egyptian magic keeps us from wondering whether or not Mark Spector has gone insane. The show refuses to let us wonder if what we're seeing is right or not. The threat of invasion at the hands of a deity from another dimension is one that might not even exist in the comics. Instead, it's used as a backdrop, an excuse to go on an odyssey through Mark Spector's disturbed and shattered mind. The comic is a story about Mark Spector first and foremost. Mark wakes up in a mental institute, unsure of how he got there. Suddenly doctors are telling them all his adventures of Moon Knight are a fallacy, an illusion, a delusion. And then he refuses to believe that. He puts on a makeshift mask and draws a moon on his forehead. He recedes back into his madness and chooses to see his therapist as Amit, a god of judgment, instead of a doctor who's trying to help him just be sane. In the show, Amit is a real Egyptian god and the one that the villain Arthur Harrow worships. Mark's reality is not called into question. It's endorsed.
I'm not crazy. I'm dead.
Harrow was a previous avatar of Khonshu. There are other avatars for other gods. Magic is real, and the threat of invasion from a deity from another dimension is very imminent. Am I calling the show a bad story? No. I like the show. How many times do I have to say I like the show? But it does undermine a lot of the nuances and a lot of the history of the character in favor of Egyptian Black Panther. Whatever that means. Does the comic do that? No. Does it treat the characters and Mark's alters poorly and with downright disrespect sometimes? No. Is the ending regarded as the weakest part of the series? No. Does it overall tell a more compelling story with more interesting visuals and masterful storytelling? Yeah. What I'm really trying to say here is the book was better. Fuck you, think bad. Right, so hi. That was my first time ever making a video essay. I hope you were entertained. I hope I made my point. I hope you'll follow me on Twitter and look at my cool art. I'm not really the type of person to voice my opinions on a lot of stuff, but every time I watch one of these Disney Plus shows, I get the urge to just go on a big rant like I did just now, and I finally got to scratch my itch here. So yeah, that being said, like, subscribe, ring the bell. I'm a YouTuber now. Hi. Comment. Feel free to call me a bitch. I don't really care. I know I'm a bitch. I'm not ashamed of it. Right, that's all. That's it from me. I'll see you when I see you. Bye. I'm Goober.